Cheers, everyone. Dave Brown here with the New Populace. Thank you again for joining me. We are seeing a lot of change right now in Africa that most Americans aren't aware of. For us, Africa is this faraway, exotic place, and we generally don't pay attention to what happens there. They say, for example, your average American couldn't find Ukraine on a map. Well, pick any country in Africa, it is the exact same thing. So for us, Africa, out of sight, out of mind, we don't pay attention. But we should, and this is why. The world is going through a transformation in the world order that is being accelerated by the war in Ukraine. So we have Russia and China becoming closer together. We have BRICS. We have the rise of the global south. And we have this competition right now in Africa between China and Russia and the United States and the West for influence because both sides want a foothold and get access to the minerals and natural resources that are in Africa. So with that in mind, let me pull up an article from Politico. Niger coup leaves France, U.S. exposed in West Africa. An ongoing military coup in Niger is threatening to destabilize one of the last Western allies in Africa's Sahel region. On Wednesday night, Niger's top military brass announced on national television they had overthrown the country's president, Mohamed Bazoum, who was democratically elected in 2021. Now, the opposition claims that there was fraud. I have no clue. I mean, how could I possibly know if the elections there were legitimate? But that was the claim by the opposition. It may be completely nonsense, so I just don't know. But I figured I'd mention that because this article, it says he was democratically elected, but that is contested. Going on, a change of regime in Niger could be a blow to the West, and more specifically to France and the United States, who have strong ties to the West African nation. For both Paris and Washington, Niger is a strategic country in the fight against Islamic terrorism, viewed as one of the most reliable U.S. allies against Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and Boko Haram. It's also one of the last Sahel nations that hasn't deepened cooperation with Russia to the West's detriment. According to Le Monde, there is no obvious signs of Moscow's footprint in the Niger coup, which is mostly driven by internal matters. However, the Wagner Group, a Russian mercenary outfit led by Yevgeny Prigozhin that is active in Africa, claimed credit for the coup Thursday. What happened is the struggle of the people of Niger against the colonialists, Prigozhin said in a voice message posted in a Wagner-branded Telegram channel. This is actually gaining independence and getting rid of the colonialists. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken spoke with Bazoum overnight and expressed the U.S.'s unwavering support. The strong U.S. economic and security partnership with Niger depends on the continuation of democratic governance and respect for the rule of law and human rights, he said, according to a statement. So we have Prigozhin saying that this is Niger fighting off the colonialists, and we have the United States, Anthony Blinken, saying that we want to have respect for democratic governance, the rule of law, and human rights. So what exactly is going on there? I don't know. As an outsider in the United States, how could I possibly have a full understanding of the internal politics of Niger? I don't. But what I do find interesting is you have, again, our side and what we're saying is happening there, and the Russian side with Prigozhin saying that this is Niger fighting off the colonialists. Now, about Prigozhin, I've said in my previous videos, he is not going anywhere. Some people were saying that Putin would disappear him, they would kill him. And I always said this, Prigozhin has political power in Russia, he has a following, and he has a use to the Kremlin and Putin. And so I never thought he was going to go anywhere, and clearly he hasn't. He's still commenting on affairs, and he was recently pictured in Moscow meeting with an African leader. So I never bought into the idea that Prigozhin was going to get 86th. I thought he was going to hang around and serve a use for Vladimir Putin, and that is what's happening. Now, what's funny about what Anthony Blinken said is that he was actually in Niger back in March, which was historic. So I have this article from Al Jazeera. Blinken makes historic trip to Niger as forces shift in Sahel. Top diplomat Anthony Blinken has embarked on his latest official trip to the African continent, where he will become the first Secretary of State from the United States to visit Niger. Thursday's historic visit comes as the West African country emerges as an increasingly significant partner to the U.S. and its European allies in the Sahel region, following successive coups in Mali and Burkina Faso and the growing influence of Russia's Wagner mercenary group. Shifting influence. But Blinken will arrive in Niger at a critical juncture for the Sahel as its internal power structures have shifted, according to Leonardo Villalone, the coordinator of the Sahel Research Group at the University of Florida. The shift began with a military-led coup in Mali in August of 2020, followed by a second coup 9 months later. Last year, Burkina Faso experienced its own military-led takeover in January, followed by a second coup in September. In both countries, military leaders cited the government's inabilities to stem local violence as motivations for the coups. There has also been growing disillusionment with both countries about European intervention in the region, led by France, which first deployed troops to Mali to respond to the rebel movement in 2012. France and a European Union task force under its command ultimately withdrew from Mali in 2022. Mali's military government, meanwhile, has increasingly turned to the Wagner Group, a Russian paramilitary company, for assistance in stemming the country's violence. The United Nations Human Rights Council, however, has since called for investigations into accounts of rights abuses, including torture, sexual violence, and disappearances committed during joint operations between Malian forces and the Wagner Group. France officially ended its military operations in Burkina Faso in February as well. The government in, well, I can't say that word, Ouagadougou, that's terrible, I can't say it, has denied allegations that the Wagner Group is already operating in the country, although experts believe the deployment of the mercenary group is likely in the coming months. So we have these two countries here, and Russia, the Wagner Group, seemingly is involved, while at the same time France is pulling back, so that vacuum is being filled by Russia and the Wagner Group. Now we have this article, New York Times, 2022, 5 African countries, 6 coups, why now? Burkina Faso this week joined a list of countries that have been recently experienced military takeovers, most plagued by insecurity, poor governance, and frustrated youth, but there's no one-size-fits-all explanation. So on this map here, we have Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, Chad, Sudan, and now in the center, we have Niger, all countries that have been knocked over by these coups, and allegedly there's some Russian involvement. What I find interesting too is that every time we have these coups, the United States wants to place sanctions on them, and who is it that comes in to stop sanctions from being put? Well, it says right here, powers farther afield haven't done much better. The United States and the European Union, the United States, the European Union, and France endorsed the sanctions on Mali, but at the UN Security Council, Russia and China blocked a statement supporting them. International powers insist that the military rulers should hold swift elections, but this demand angers some people who think the military is acting in the country's interest. So, in the United Nations, Europe, the United States, versus Russia and China, who are blocking sanctions. And this is one of the problems I think the United States has. Every time the West goes into Africa or is dealing with Africa generally, we always have strings attached to our support and money. Where when Russia and China come in, they don't do that. They don't try to dictate to them how they should organize their society, whether or not they should, push LGBTQ plus stuff. They just come in and go, do what you want. We just want to set up an economic alliance here where we can obviously get benefits. Let's not pretend that Russia and China are just, purely benevolent. They want access to minerals and natural resources. But when they come in, again, they don't have any strings attached. Just let's make a deal. We'll support you. We'll have our operations in the country to extract resources. We'll help you develop. We'll build roads. We'll build buildings and cities and everything, whatever. But we're not going to lecture you. We're not going to tell you how you should live. And this message is increasingly popular, I think, in Africa, who has dealt with hundreds of years of the Western countries intervening in Africa, putting military bases in there, taking advantage, and now they have somewhere else to go. They have an alternative, and that alternative is Russia and China. So again, as the world order shifts and China and Russia get more power, there's going to be more and more countries, developing countries, not just in Africa, but also in Southeast Asia and South America, maybe even Central America, who start to gravitate more toward those other countries rather than the United States. And this is what Americans don't seem to realize is happening. We're also seeing a shift away from the US dollar. People want using a basket of currencies. That should be very alarming for the United States because much of the value of the US dollar is because every country in the world holds a large amount of US currency to do trade and to have transactions, and that artificially gives the US dollar value. There's a reason why countries in the Middle East who started to turn away from the US dollar, well, they got invaded, they got destabilized. They had democracy and freedom brought to them because what we were trying to prevent was this domino effect where one country blows out the dollar, then the next country does. The next thing you know, all these countries are blowing out the dollar, and that could cause a huge, inflationary effect on the U.S. dollar and undermine our control of the world monetary system. So right now, there are several countries, Russia and China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, who are getting away from the U.S. dollar. And this is a big deal that your average American, doesn't really understand or are paying attention to. And we're having, again, this reshuffling of the world order. And long term, and this is important, U.S. is very short term in our thinking, but Russia and China, very long term in their thinking. They're thinking 10, 15, 20, 30 years ahead. And they're very slowly working on building this infrastructure that will, replace the United States as the world power. And at some point, the U.S. is going to realize this. And it might be like one of those things where just overnight, everything just changes. And all of a sudden, the entire U.S. public becomes aware of the fact that, oh my God, we're not number one anymore. Things have completely changed. I think we're going to have that moment sometime. I don't know if it's 5 years from now or 10 years from now, but we're building toward that moment. And I think a lot of the geopolitical planners in D.C., some of them do understand this, and that's why they're clawing at Russia. That's why they're clawing at China. That's why they're sort of having this temper tantrum of starting proxy wars and provocations, because they do at some level realize that this transformation is happening and it scares them. And now we see in Africa, losing more influence there, more people turning toward China and Russia. This is only the beginning. Now, if we were smart in the U.S., we would focus on our internal matters, build up our own economy, our own manufacturing, worry about our own sphere. But we are making the mistake that every empire makes. they start to become imperialist, they start to spread themselves too thin, they start fighting wars all across the world, and eventually that leads to the collapse of that empire. And the United States is not special, we are not unique, and we may see the same thing happen to us. But hopefully, if it does happen, it's not catastrophic and a complete collapse of American society. Hopefully, it's just us realizing, okay, we have to focus inward and stop. Stop with this whole global empire thing. It's not going to pan out, not going to work, and we focus on our own domestic issues. That's what we should be doing, But people in Washington, not too smart, greedy, and are in it for themselves, not for the country. And that's what happens in all these empires. The elites are greedy, and instead of focusing on making their country better, they focus on fattening their pockets and going around the world trying to destroy other countries so they can profit off it. But that is coming to an end for the United States. And China, if at some point in the future you are the biggest economy in the world, I hope you learned that lesson as far as empire and trying to expand militarily across the world. Eventually, that always causes a failure and causes a collapse, and that will happen to you too as well. So focus on your internal economy, focus on making China strong, and if you stay there, you're fine. You do what we did, or what the U.S. or the British Empire did, at some point it's going to collapse. And right now, the United States, we are getting real close to that level, whether the American public realizes it or not. Well, that's it for now. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.